I couldn't believe my eyes. There she was, Karen in all her entitled glory, standing outside my lake, screaming at the top of her lungs as if she had just witnessed a crime scene. Except the only crime here was her delusion. I had just finished installing a lock on my own gate, the one that led to my own private lake, when she appeared out of nowhere, hands on her hips, shaking with the kind of fury you'd expect from someone who just got scammed out of their life savings. "You can't do this," she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me like I had just violated some sacred neighborhood law. "This lake belongs to everyone. Open it right now or I'm calling the police." I blinked. Then I laughed because surely this had to be a joke. I had spent years dealing with her ridiculous HOA rules, arguing over my grass height, my mailbox color, and even the way I parked my truck in my own driveway, but this was a new level of crazy. "Karen," I said, still amused, "this is my lake. I own this land. You have no authority over it, and neither does the HOA. Her face twitched. She actually twitched. "That's a community lake. You can't just hoard it like some greedy." I held up my phone and tapped on the property deed. "You see this? This says otherwise. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a peaceful evening to enjoy." That's when she lost her mind. The HOA had always been a nightmare, but Karen was something else entirely. She wasn't just a member. She was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. The kind of person who believed that just because she paid a couple of HOA fees, she suddenly had jurisdiction over everyone's property. She had spent years making my life miserable, sending passive-aggressive letters about my non-regulation garden gnome, trying to fine me for having a truck that was too large for the aesthetic standards, and worst of all, inviting herself and her HOA friends to my lake like it was some public attraction. I had tolerated a lot, but when I started finding random people fishing on my dock, grilling on my land, and even leaving beer cans on my property, I knew I had to put a stop to it. So I did what any sane homeowner would do. I built a fence and put a lock on it. That was supposed to be the end of it. But no. Karen wasn't the kind of woman to take a reality check gracefully. Instead of backing down, she started a full-blown campaign to reclaim my lake as a community resource. She printed out fake HOA notices, declaring the lake a historical neighborhood landmark that must remain open to the public. She went door to door, gathering signatures from clueless neighbors who just wanted her to go away. And now here she was, threatening to call the cops on me for securing my own property. "You've crossed the line this time, Mark," she yelled, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She had probably expected me to panic, to back down, maybe even unlock the gate just to keep the peace. Instead, I watched as she actually dialed 911, putting on her best victim voice as she spoke. "Yes, hello, I'd like to report a crime. A very serious crime. My neighbor is illegally blocking access to a community lake. Yes, that's right, he put up a fence and locked it. He's hoarding it for himself and it's not fair. We all have a right to use it." I smirked. The sheer confidence in her voice was something to behold. Karen didn't just believe in her own lies, she lived them. I didn't have to wait long before a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, looking mildly annoyed, like they had much better things to do than deal with whatever nonsense was about to unfold. "All right," one of them said, rubbing his temples. "Who called us?" Karen launched into an Oscar-worthy performance, complete with exaggerated hand gestures and an almost tearful recounting of how I had stolen the community's beloved lake. She waved her arms toward the locked gate, practically daring the officers to arrest me on the spot. The officer turned to me. "Sir, is this true?" I simply handed him my property deed. The moment the officer's eyes scanned the document, I saw it. The flicker of realization. The small, almost imperceptible sigh that said, "Oh great, another entitled neighbor situation." "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Karen, "this land belongs to him. He has every right to put up a fence." Karen's face went from smug to horrified in an instant. What? No. That can't be right. The HOA rules clearly state. "The HOA doesn't have authority over private property," the officer interrupted, his patience thinning. "You can't force someone to allow public access to their land." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then she did what Karen does best, doubled down on the crazy. "This is a mistake," she snapped. "The HOA owns this entire neighborhood. We have rules, regulations, This lake has been used by the community for years. He can't just change that. The officer sighed, clearly having reached his limit. Ma'am, unless you want to be cited for trespassing or property damage, I suggest you leave before this becomes a bigger problem. That was the moment it hit her. The realization. The slow, painful acknowledgement that she had lost. I could see the internal struggle, her mind racing for a way to twist the situation in her favor. But there was nothing left. No HOA nonsense, no fake rules, no entitled declarations could save her now. She glared at me one last time, her face red with a mixture of rage and humiliation. This isn't over, she hissed before storming off. The officer turned to me. Let us know if she causes more problems. I chuckled. Oh, I have a feeling she will. As they drove away, I leaned against my new fence, enjoying the silence. Karen might have lost today, but I knew her well enough to know that this was far from over. She wasn't the type to accept defeat. If anything, I had just provoked her into something even worse. And sure enough, the next morning my gate was gone. I woke up feeling satisfied. The previous night had been a victory, a moment of pure joy watching Karen's world crumble in front of the police. But that feeling didn't last long. When I stepped outside to admire my newly installed gate, something felt off. At first I thought I was imagining things, but as I walked closer my heart sank. The gate was gone. Not broken, not unlocked. Gone. The entire structure had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the post holes in the ground where it once stood. For a moment I just stood there dumbfounded. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the area as if the gate might have magically relocated itself. But there was no mystery here. This had Karen written all over it. She had clearly taken the defeat personally, and instead of moving on like a normal person, she had escalated. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone and checked the security camera footage. Sure enough, there she was. Karen and a couple of her devoted HOA minions sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m. with bolt cutters, gloves, and the kind of determination that would have been admirable if it weren't so entirely unhinged. I watched as they worked quickly, cutting through the metal lock, removing the hinges, and literally walking off with my entire gate. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. Because at this point, what else could I do? She was so convinced that she was above the law, above logic, that she had committed a literal crime rather than accept reality. But if she thought I was just going to let this slide, she had another thing coming. I called the police. This time, I wasn't going to let her walk away with nothing but a bruised ego. Trespassing was one thing, but this was theft and destruction of property. And I had video evidence. When the police arrived, they didn't even bother hiding their exasperation. The same officer from yesterday stepped out of the cruiser, shaking his head like he already knew exactly what he was walking into. Let me guess, he said, sighing. Karen? I nodded, handed him my phone, and watched as his expression went from annoyed to genuinely impressed at the level of Karen's lunacy. He rewound the footage, staring at the screen as she and her accomplices carried my gate away like a trophy. She really thinks she runs this place, huh? Oh, you have no idea, I muttered. Within the hour, Karen was being confronted at her house by the police. I stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching the whole thing unfold. She tried, of course, to lie her way out of it. She claimed the gate had been illegally installed, that she was merely protecting community rights, that I was a selfish neighbor hoarding resources. The police, however, weren't having it. Ma'am, the officer said, his voice laced with exhaustion, you were caught on video trespassing and stealing property. That's a crime. You don't get to make up your own laws just because you're in the HOA. Karen's jaw dropped. For the first time, she actually looked worried. I didn't steal anything. That gate was never supposed to be there in the first place. The officer folded his arms. And who gave you the authority to decide that? She faltered, her face flushing red. The HOA. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over private property, the officer snapped. You've already been warned about this. If this continues, you're going to be facing real legal consequences. I could see the battle happening inside her head. The realization that she had backed herself into a corner. But Karen wasn't one to admit defeat easily. She wasn't going to let a little thing like the law stop her from believing she was right. You can't charge me for taking something that was put up illegally, she spat, trying one last time to twist reality to fit her narrative. The officer sighed. That's not how this works. I leaned against my truck, enjoying every second of it. "Where is my gate, Karen?" finally asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Karen," the officer repeated, his patience dwindling, "if you don't return the gate, you'll be arrested for theft. You understand that, right?" There was a long, heavy pause. And then, without another word, she stormed back inside her house, only to emerge moments later with my gate pieces stacked in a pile like some kind of offering. "Here," she snapped. "Take your stupid gate." The officer took a deep breath, looked at the pile, then at Karen and said, "You're still going to be fined for trespassing and property destruction." Her face twisted into pure outrage. "For what?" "I was just trying to do what was best for the community." The officer ignored her, turned to me and asked if I wanted to press charges. I almost said yes. I wanted to see her dragged off in cuffs for all the trouble she had caused me. But then I thought about it. The fines alone would already be humiliating enough. And besides, I had a much better idea for revenge. "No," I said, smiling, "I'll handle it my own way." The officer gave me a curious look but nodded. "All right, but if she pulls something like this again, don't hesitate to call us." Karen looked almost smug for a moment, as if she thought she had somehow won. She had no idea what I had planned next. That very evening I installed a brand new gate. This one. Bigger, stronger, reinforced with steel. Not just that, but I installed a motion-activated sprinkler system right in front of it. I sat on my porch watching, waiting. And sure enough, Karen couldn't help herself. At exactly 11:30 p.m. she crept toward the gate again. She probably thought I had gone to bed. She had no idea that the moment she stepped too close, the sprinklers would go off, blasting her with freezing cold water at full force. The shriek that came from her was priceless. She ran, soaked and furious, back toward her house, screaming about property abuse and illegal water traps. I laughed so hard I almost fell off my chair. The next morning I made sure to water my plants by the fence, just in time for her to stomp outside and glare at me. "This is harassment," she snapped. I sipped my coffee, barely holding back my grin. "This is my property, Karen. You don't get to dictate what happens here." Her nostrils flared and she stormed away. I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't someone who accepted defeat. But at this point I was almost looking forward to what she'd try next. Because no matter what she did, I was always going to win. The morning after Karen's unfortunate encounter with my newly installed sprinkler system, I woke up feeling refreshed, knowing she had finally tasted the consequences of her entitled actions. But deep down I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat and move on. No, she was a storm waiting to happen, brewing behind closed doors, plotting her next move. And sure enough, she didn't disappoint. It started with a letter. Not just any letter, but a formal HOA violation notice delivered straight to my mailbox. I nearly choked on my coffee when I opened it. According to the document, I had committed multiple infractions that required immediate correction. The list was so absurd I had to read it twice to believe it. Violation number 1. Unauthorized water usage that disrupts community harmony. Translation: my motion-activated sprinkler system had been deemed a threat. Violation number 2. Unauthorized construction of a community obstruction. This one referred to my gate, the same one Karen had stolen and then returned in pieces. Violation number 3. Failure to comply with HOA regulations regarding shared natural resources. This was clearly about the lake, which, as I had proven multiple times, belonged to me. I laughed. Out loud. It was the kind of laughter that comes when you witness someone in pure denial of reality. The HOA had no authority over my property and Karen knew it. But she had somehow convinced the board to back her ridiculous claims. I decided to handle this the fun way. Instead of storming into the next HOA meeting and making a scene, I took a different approach. I printed every piece of legal paperwork I had. My deed, county zoning laws, property rights, and even a signed statement from the officer who had handled Karen's trespassing stunt. Then I waited. A few days later, the HOA held a public meeting. Karen had organized it specifically to discuss neighborhood concerns, which, of course, meant she had turned it into a public trial against me. The moment I walked into the meeting room, I could feel every eye on me. Karen stood at the front, smug and confident as if she had already won. She cleared her throat dramatically and pointed at me. "We need to address an urgent issue," she began, holding up a stack of papers. "One of our residents, Mark, has been actively violating community rules, creating a hostile environment, and refusing to comply with our regulations. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, letting her talk. The board members nodded along, looking concerned, though a few of them already seemed skeptical. Karen continued, flipping through her papers like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. First, he installed an illegal gate that blocks access to the lake, which has been enjoyed by this community for generations. I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak yet. Second, he installed a dangerous water system that directly targets and harasses community members. She was referring to the sprinklers, obviously. Murmurs spread across the room. Some people looked intrigued. Others, like my neighbor Jim, were clearly trying not to laugh. Finally, Karen declared, her voice rising with triumph, he refuses to acknowledge that this lake is a shared neighborhood space. This kind of selfish behavior has no place in a community like ours. She slammed her papers down, folded her arms, and looked at me as if expecting me to bow down and apologize. Instead, I slowly pulled out my own stack of documents. That was a great speech, Karen, I said, my voice dripping with amusement. Really dramatic. But let's go ahead and clear up a few things, shall we? I stood up, walked to the front, and placed my property deed right in the middle of the table. This is my deed, I continued, tapping the document. It states in clear legal terms that this land, including the lake, is privately owned. It is not, nor has it ever been, part of the HOA's jurisdiction. Your claim that this is a community lake is, frankly, a complete lie. Karen's face twitched. And as for my so-called illegal gate, here's a statement from law enforcement confirming that I had every right to install it to keep trespassers off my land. In fact, I even have security footage of you and your friends stealing it. A gasp rippled through the room. Several board members turned to Karen, their expressions shifting from concern to suspicion. And let's not forget the sprinklers. You're right, Karen, they're motion activated. But guess what? They're installed on my property. The only way someone would get hit by them is if they were trespassing. So tell me, Karen, why were you on my property at 11:30 at night? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Her face had gone a deep shade of red. The HOA president, an older man who had clearly been tolerating Karen's antics for too long, rubbed his temples and turned to her. Karen, is any of this true? She sputtered, looking around for support, but even her usual allies were silent. I wasn't done yet. I dropped one final document on the table. This, I said, is a lawsuit I'm prepared to file against the HOA for harassment, property damage, and defamation. I have every legal right to sue for damages if this nonsense continues. Silence. Absolute, delicious silence. The HOA president looked at the papers, sighed, and turned to Karen. This is a serious problem. Karen, you've overstepped your authority. The HOA doesn't have legal grounds to enforce any of this. Karen's eyes widened. But he... Enough, he cut her off. I think it's time we hold a vote on removing you from the HOA board. Karen gasped as if someone had physically struck her. You can't do that. Oh, we can, Jim, my neighbor, chimed in, smirking. And I second the motion. One by one the hands went up. Within minutes, Karen was officially removed. She stormed out of the room, humiliated, shouting about how we would regret this, and how she was going to sue everyone. But her reign was over. As I walked out of the meeting, Jim patted me on the back. That was beautiful, he said. We've been waiting years for someone to take her down. Over the next few weeks, life in the neighborhood changed. Without Karen micromanaging everything, people actually relaxed. The HOA even dropped most of their ridiculous rules after realizing they had been following Karen's nonsense for years. As for Karen, she tried to retaliate by filing complaints with the county. They ignored her. She tried rebuilding her power by rallying neighbors to her side, but after everything she had done, no one wanted anything to do with her. The last time I saw her, she was standing by the lake, staring at my new, even stronger gate, looking utterly defeated. I raised my coffee mug in a mock toast. Beautiful morning, isn't it? She turned, stomped away, and I swear I heard her muttering under her breath. For the first time in years, I finally had peace. And best of all, the lake was mine just like it always had been.